Now from ITN, the major international news story of the day, the successful end of the Superpower summit in Washington. Mr. Gorbachev has set off for home, and President Reagan has told Americans that the two leaders have made real progress. Well, here's ITN's Glenn O'Glaser with a roundup of the last few hours.
Before leaving the United States, Mr. Gorbachev held a 2-hour news conference at the Russian embassy in Washington. The Soviet leader described his talks with President Reagan as intense and sometimes blunt, but he said he wanted the two superpowers to grow closer together.
Americans are standing on the street. They wave their hands. And I said to them, look, that's what we're talking with the president about, how to come closer to each other, how to improve our cooperation. So go ahead and prod the president towards that. Our Soviet people are solidly prodding us towards that goal.
From the Russian embassy, a cavalcade of 46 official cars drove to Andrews Air Force Base, and Mikhail and Raisa Gorbachev boarded the plane to take them to East Berlin, where the Soviet leader will brief his Warsaw Pact allies. Just minutes after Mr. Gorbachev's plane took off, 3 hours ago, President Reagan spoke to the American people. He told them the two leaders were closer to cutting long-range nuclear weapons.
He and I made real progress toward our goal, first agreed to at Geneva, to achieve deep 50% cuts in our arsenals of those powerful weapons. We agreed that we should build on our efforts to achieve agreement on a START treaty at the earliest possible date. As I told the British Parliament in 1982, we seek to rid the world of the two great nightmares of the post-war era, the threat of nuclear war and the threat of totalitarianism.
Earlier, the two men said goodbye with promises to meet again in Moscow next year.
For analysis of the closing events and speeches of that much-acclaimed summit, we go now to the special edition of ITN's World News, which was broadcast to Europe last night, just before Mr. Gorbachev left America. The programme is introduced, as usual, by John Suchet.
Gorbachev surprises everybody with a walkabout in Washington. Both leaders say the summit has been a success. The defense leaders try on some different hats. Pressure from inside Russia to leave Afghanistan. Hello, I'm John Suchet in London with the World News from ITN. The Superpower Summit in Washington has ended, with President Reagan describing it as a clear success. Mr. Reagan said the summit had lit the sky with hope for all people of goodwill. According to Mr. Gorbachev, a good deal has been accomplished. He described the signing of the INF Treaty to ban medium-range nuclear weapons as an unprecedented step in the nuclear age. President Reagan is now expected to go to Moscow for another summit next spring, and Washington sources are saying they could also agree by June on the withdrawal of Russian troops from Afghanistan. The final day showed yet again a new face of the Soviet leader. Unscheduled and to everyone's surprise, he made an unprecedented impromptu walkabout in the streets of Washington and had a friendly chat with a potential future president.
Mr. Gorbachev's guest this morning, Vice President George Bush. He arrived for breakfast and stayed long over schedule. Did the Soviet leader believe he was negotiating with the next president? This encounter certainly won't have hurt Mr. Bush's chances. Over at the Pentagon, meanwhile, more extraordinary scenes for the summit scrapbook. Marshal Sergei Agramayev, top man in the Soviet military, meeting his American opposite number, Admiral William Crowe, and being ushered into what he must regard as the lion's den. But nothing more menacing awaited him than the Admiral's military hat collection, displayed with due pride.
This is an Italian midshipman's hat in 1806.
As they sat down with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Marshal Agramayev was asked about the talks on long-range missiles.
They're
going on with difficulties, not easily.
The problem again, Star Wars and Soviet insistence that the US adheres to the restrictions they believe the ABM Treaty places on testing in space and deployment. Back at the Soviet embassy, still no sign of Mr. Gorbachev. After his talks with Mr. Bush, he reportedly disappeared into a private room. The Soviet leader finally emerged an hour and a half late, setting off for his final round of talks with the president. On the way, extraordinary scenes again. The Soviet motorcade suddenly coming to a halt in the center of Washington, security men scurrying in momentary panic, and the General Secretary of the Soviet Union out of his car for a walkabout.
I would like to say hello to you. I want to say hello to you.
George Bush, traveling with him, watched in amazement as Mr. Gorbachev plunged into the crowd for a hero's welcome.
Come back here.
And to end it all, Bush and Gorbachev together in triumph, an image guaranteed to recur again and again in the election campaign ahead.
I just couldn't believe it. I think it's great that he came out to meet us all like that.
I think he was very special to do that. That was very special. He didn't have to do it, and he did it. I am very surprised and pleased.
What do you think of Gorbachev?
The guy is a PR genius. I mean, jumping out of the car like that. Unbelievable.
That's great.
At the White House, it transpired that Mr. Reagan had delayed the talks for a briefing from his key arms control advisors, Mr. Gorbachev readily agreeing to stand by until he was ready. Tim Ewart, ITN, Washington.
When it came time for the official farewells on the lawn of the White House, both leaders said it was important to keep talking together. Mr. Gorbachev said he would like to come back for a longer tour of the United States to meet and chat with ordinary Americans. He said he had detected a movement among the American people that matched the mood of his own people for improving Soviet-US relations.
The rain came down and the umbrellas went up as the two superpower leaders stepped out of the White House for the final ceremony of the summit. The paperwork's been signed, but this was intended as a final chance for both leaders to speak to the world via television cameras outside. President Reagan said the summit had been a clear success.
These last few days have been exciting indeed for both of us. For our fellow countrymen who followed the course of our discussions, I'm pleased to report that upon the completion of our business, that this summit has been a clear success. And as we leave, it is up to both sides to ensure that the luster does not wear off and to follow through on our commitments as we move forward to the next steps in improving the relations between our countries and peoples.
Mikhail Gorbachev said this was the first step towards real disarmament.
Superpowers took upon themselves the responsibility to practically eliminate part of the nuclear weapons. And by doing that, we hope that we have put the beginning to the nuclear disarmament.
The applause and congratulations over, the two leaders will now put into action what's been talked about here and look to future talks on a Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan and reducing further the world's stockpile of nuclear weapons.
The spirit of this summit has been one of international cooperation and goodwill, and that spirit is not just confined to the political leaders of the two superpowers. Ordinary people in both Russia and America are now more curious than ever about each other. To find out how some younger people viewed the summit, ITN linked a Russian and an American student by satellite. Carol Barnes asked them if they would like to visit each other's countries.
I never felt so good when I usually watch different political television programs. I never have such strong feelings, and this time it was for the first time. I was really amazed, and it was something special.
I could see in Gorbachev that they were willing to negotiate, and it seems like we're entering a new era, that the Cold War is coming to an end, and it just really made me feel good that the two superpowers were finally willing to negotiate.
Would you like, for example, to have an exchange visit, perhaps with Vladimir, if such a thing could be arranged, 3 months in each other's countries?
Oh, I would definitely enjoy that. I mean, I'm sure Vladimir has learned a lot of stereotypes about the Americans. You know, we're supposed to be so decadent and all that.
Well, it's a good point, Vladimir. Is that what happens?
What I want to say is that in our country, of course, we get very little information about the United States. I think there could be more. I'd like to visit Washington, the capital of the United States. I'd like to see the White House, different other interesting museum places.
Does the lifestyle interest you, the different lifestyle?
Yes, of course, the lifestyle interests me.
I would just love to go there and walk through Red Square and see the Kremlin and just talk with the regular people there and see what their views are. And I'm sure that, you know, we're not as different as our leaders would like us to believe.
Vladimir and Lorenzo, thank you very much indeed.
A Moscow couple have named their newly born twin boys in honour of the two superpower leaders. The twins, christened Mikhail and Ronald Sakharov, were born on Tuesday, the day the two leaders signed the INF agreement at the Washington summit. The proud parents sent a telegram to Washington saying, "We are sure our children will live under peaceful skies." Away from the summit, the other major world story is that the American trade deficit has hit a new record low. The latest monthly trade figures have sent the markets and the dollar into a sharp decline. The previous record for July led to the crash in October in the world's stock markets. The Dow Jones Industrial Average closed at 1,855.44. That's down 47.08. Here's Glenn Oglazer.
The American trade figures are far worse than even the gloomiest predictions and have dashed hopes that the American economy was about to strengthen. The trade deficit for October was $17.63 billion. Imports rose to a record $39.38 billion. The trade deficit with Europe was $3 billion. There are fears that these figures could lead to another major crash in the world's stock markets. Reaction in Europe was mixed. The Financial Times 100 index in London fell 19.7, but the Frankfurt Commerzbank index was up 6.1, and the Amsterdam General was also up 5 points. Tokyo closed before the trade figures were released, and the Nikkei Dow was up nearly 400 points. The most marked effect so far has been on the dollar, and there are hints from Washington of a change in policy to steady the American currency. Against the German mark, the dollar fell 2.6 pfennigs. Against the Japanese yen, it fell 3 yen, while the pound rose against the dollar by nearly 3 cents. The dollar also hit record lows against the Swiss franc and the Dutch guilder, and a 6-year low against the French franc. Gold bullion closed up more than $4 an ounce in London, and North Sea Brent blend oil is up 55 cents. Other business stories: Italy and Argentina have signed a $5 billion trade treaty. The deal with Italian Prime Minister Giovanni Goria came during a 3-day state visit by Argentine President Raul Alfonsín. Shares in the Anglo-French company Eurotunnel are trading at $2 below their offer price of $6.30 in both London and Paris. British Airways has made a new $360 million bid for British Caledonian in response to a rival offer by Scandinavian airline SAS. And the Egyptian Al Fayed family, which owns Harrods in London, has bought almost 10% of another British store group, Sears, from the Australian tycoon Robert Holmes à Court.
The business news. In part 2, we'll look at European reaction to the summit. We'll have other European reports and the day's main stories in Britain. And we'll have a special report. So, still to come. NATO's chief says the arms deal is only a small step. Daring helicopter escape from English prison. And why baby Claire has made medical history. Welcome back. In this part 2, we start with some of the European reaction to the achievements of the Washington summit. The West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl has said short-range nuclear missiles should be included in disarmament talks. This appeared to set Germany at odds with its NATO partners. Herr Kohl was speaking in a parliamentary debate in Bonn. And the NATO Secretary-General Lord Carrington described the INF Treaty as only a small step, and said nuclear weapons remained essential. He was speaking in Brussels ahead of a visit by the American Secretary of State George Shultz to brief NATO foreign ministers.
At NATO headquarters today, an unreserved welcome for the progress already made by the American and Russian leaders. The signing of the INF Treaty applauded.
It's a milestone for arms control. It's fully consistent with security interests. It's the agreement we asked for and which we now want to see ratified as soon as possible.
The General Secretary said America should know Europe supported its negotiating stance, but had a warning for politicians who believed spending on Europe's nuclear and conventional defences can now be cut back.
The INF agreement is only a small step. Military realities remain, especially the conventional imbalance, which is real, together with the Warsaw Pact enormous superiority in tanks and artillery.
Tomorrow, American Foreign Secretary Shultz will be here to brief the NATO allies on the finer details of agreements reached in Washington and the prospects for a second summit in Moscow next year to negotiate a 50% cut in strategic weapons. Paul Davis, ITN, Brussels.
Now stories from elsewhere in Europe. Speculation is mounting in France that one of its best-known actors is planning to run for president next year. Yves Montand is scheduled to appear on a television show this Saturday that's usually reserved for politicians. A former communist sympathiser, Montand has already hinted in an interview last year that he might run for president. Hundreds of people have been admitted to hospital in Athens with heart and lung complaints caused by city smog, according to a group of environmental researchers. The government has already restricted traffic in the city centre to try to cut down the pollution. Exhaust fumes from ageing city buses and cars have been blamed for most of the city's pollution. A leading Nazi hunter was briefly detained after putting up posters demanding the resignation of President Waldheim. Beate Klasfeld taped Nazi posters outside President Waldheim's office in Vienna before being arrested by police. The posters depicted the 50th anniversary of Hitler's annexation of Austria to Nazi Germany and the anniversary of Hitler's birth in Austria. Among the main stories in Britain, a couple who were told they could never have children have been showing off their new baby daughter. Baby Claire was born thanks to a revolutionary technique. She's the first baby in Britain to have been conceived from an anonymously donated egg.
Baby Claire's chance of life came after Donna and Paul Lloyd Henry had tried to have a child for more than 5 years. A common disorder meant Donna couldn't produce eggs, but she refused offers of donations from her 3 sisters, fearing family repercussions later. Then came the chance of an anonymous donation from a married woman through specialists at Bristol University. It's only the second time in the world a baby's been born by in vitro fertilization using an anonymous egg donation. Although 19 test tube babies have been born, the eggs have all come from known donors, mostly relatives. In Donna's case, it took 5 attempts before the fertilized egg was successfully transplanted into her womb.
We would not accept defeat at any stage. There have been a few pitfalls on the way, but we've seen it through, we've succeeded, and we hope that it gives inspiration to other people.
The birth of Claire is seen as a major breakthrough, bringing hope to Britain's 275,000 infertile couples. Already several women around the country have started similar treatment using eggs with no genetic link to the mother.
A murderer and a burglar have escaped from a prison in a hijacked helicopter. It was hired from an airport by men who said they wanted to look at golf courses. Instead, they flew to the prison near Leicester and forced the pilot to land. Other prisoners held the guards while the 2 men escaped. The helicopter later landed and the fugitives stole a car. Next, our special report, which looks behind one of the major issues at the Superpower summit in Washington. President Reagan and Mr. Gorbachev have been discussing the timetable for the withdrawal of Soviet troops from Afghanistan. Pressure is also growing within the Soviet Union for a pullout. An increasing number of protest letters in Pravda say Russian soldiers who die in Afghanistan are not being honoured as they should. And university students say it's time for the troops to come home. It's reminiscent on a smaller scale of the protests made by American veterans of the Vietnam War. This special report from ITN American affiliate ABC.
When 19-year-old Igor Ilyin was buried in this Moscow cemetery, so too was part of the truth, that he was killed fighting in Afghanistan, died in a conflict that's claimed at least 12,000 Soviet lives. But Igor's tombstone, like those of others who fought there, makes no mention of Afghanistan, conceals a story Soviet citizens only now are beginning to hear.
Judging by the articles written by Soviet journalists from Afghanistan, you could think that Soviet soldiers and officers there are only raising flowers, nothing else.
Raising and receiving them, according to the Soviet media, but a complete distortion of the true picture, thought Artyom Borovik. So last spring, the 24-year-old Soviet journalist donned fatigues, picked up a gun, and went to Afghanistan.
To see the reality, what is happening there, what the soldiers think on this 8th year of this a very long and tragic war.
What he saw, and later reported, came as a shock to many. Low morale among troops, graphic accounts of death and suffering. "I wouldn't come back to this place for anything," one soldier complained. Something Soviet journalists just didn't write about, until Artyom Borovik did. Artyom Borovik's magazine sponsors a public forum. Hundreds attend. In handwritten questions, they speak out. "Why are we there?" one asks. Another demands, "Let's call a dirty war a dirty war." "Remember Vietnam," writes another. On Soviet television, a documentary includes the anguished accounts of those who survived.
No matter what, I know that the feeling of having done something dirty, alien to a human being, will live in me. The stain will remain on me.
All we want, our soldiers come home.
I think this war is not a good thing, but I think that it was our duty. Our duty to
But
help.
I don't believe my government.
I'm sorry? What did you say? I can't express myself, he says, but I think we should withdraw our troops. Such criticism, made openly, was unheard of before Glasnost. That, and pumping Western reporters for information.
And I want to ask you, what is your opinion? How many Soviet soldiers were killed in Afghanistan from 1979 to 1967?
They say 12,000, at least.
Thank you.
This, after all, is still a country where they break up demonstrations, where free speech and dissent are carefully controlled. To date, the Soviet press has yet to publish the number of casualties in Afghanistan, the circumstances of the invasion, the brutalities inflicted on the population.
If our leaders are sincere, if they want to put some morals, some democratic principles into our society, the first thing they need, that is to reveal all the secrets about Afghanistan war.
I think you see 100% truth about Afghanistan will be said right after the war is ended. I really think, I really feel, I really hope it will be ended soon.
But for some, it may never be. For veterans like 30-year-old Valery Burkhoff, who was seriously wounded and now walks on artificial legs. Like Americans in Vietnam, coming home has not been easy. We got notes and letters, he told us, saying, "Why should you be treated like heroes? You've done nothing heroic." Valery and his buddies are now fighting a new war, against public indifference. They would like a monument to those who fought in Afghanistan, a healing of what some have called the country's deepest moral wound. The Soviet army, however, is still training soldiers for Afghanistan. But there's a growing weariness, a feeling that what started 8 years ago must be ended soon. Was it a mistake? For soldiers like Igor Ilyin, it's too late for such questions. But the epitaph on his grave may answer, was the price really worth it? You left life suddenly, it says, but you leave sorrow forever.
Our special report. Finally, the highlights of the closing hours of that much-acclaimed Superpower Summit. Just in case, Mr. Gorbachev got to know a potential future American president, George Bush. Russia's military chief learns about headwear, not hardware, from his American opposite number. Then the Soviet leader caught his own security men on the hop by just jumping out of his car and going for an unprecedented Washington walkabout. The crowds loved it. Finally, the rain came after a sunny winter summit, but it did nothing to dampen the enthusiastic and optimistic tone of the official farewells. And that's the world news from ITN. From me, goodbye.